All right, you guys ready? All right, so we left off at verse 10. How does verse 10 start? But. Let me jump to that. All right, so it's a contrast. Interesting. Did anybody look that up in the Greek? It's not there. Excellent. Good job. So the but's actually not there if you look in the Greek. The translators add it for context or understanding. So the translators of the New King James are saying that there's what we would call an implied contrast here. That the material in the previous section is being contrasted with this, but there's no actual but there in the Greek. This is being added by the translators. And so we'll go ahead and dig into it. We'll treat it as a contrast because I think there can be an implied contrast here. But let's dig into it. What were, if we were going to take this as a contrast, what do you think's being contrasted? And that would be our factual question, right? What's being contrasted? And so where does this start? The beginning of a paragraph. So what's it at least? At least the previous paragraph before, if the previous paragraph isn't linked to other paragraphs. That makes sense? If it's linked, it's going to be with all that linkage. All right? So, yeah, exactly. Where have you been? You should have. All right? Does everybody get that? Right? So if you look at the paragraph before that, in fact, let's go to that paragraph. Right? Verse 8 starts with finally, which means it's the end of something, which means it's got to have something before it. And what comes before that? Do you remember what we said about those first 7 verses? What are they? What? Applications. Yeah, they're imperatives. It's a whole, he gives us the big idea of stand firm or stand fast in the Lord, and then a bunch of imperatives that kind of explain what it means to stand fast. You guys remember that? Yeah? Okay. So really, this contrast, the starting in verse 10, is with 1 through 9. That make sense? Everybody see that? Okay, and so here's how it would look if we were going to break it out. All right, we know we've got this but, and so on the front side of the but, we have this idea of standing fast in the Lord. And then that's followed by whatever's true. Oops, I have the wrong slide here. I did not. That's going to be too much detail for us tonight. Let me exit out of this and make sure that this updates. No, that's not it. That's because this isn't updated. Let me see if that worked. There it goes. The joy of the cloud. All right. So we have this idea of standing fast in the Lord, right? Oh, I still didn't do it. So there's all these imperatives, basically, right? It's stand fast in the Lord. And do you remember the 5 things that he said to do to stand fast in the Lord? We stand fast in the Lord by being what? Yeah, by being agreeable, by being joyful. Exactly. Oh, you know what I have? That's why. Let me go to this one. Here we go. Right? So it's going to be by being agreeable, which was verse 2, which was be of the same mind, which was literally agree on the same things. And then it was by being joyful, choosing to have our attitude, not letting our attitude be chosen for us, being gentle, being peaceful, and being mindful. You guys remember that? Okay, now that's contrasted with what? How does verse 10 start? What's the second half of the contrast? All right, so he says, you stand firm, but I am going to rejoice greatly in the Lord. Okay? So he says, I want you to stand firm, but I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. And what's he going to rejoice about? What does it say? Look at the text. What does the text say? Your care for me has flourished. Now, does he think they don't care? How do you know that? What does it say right after that? Surely you did care, right? So he's not questioning their care. What's he saying has happened? Yeah, the care's been revived. It started to flourish. Right? And the reason it wasn't flourishing was what? They didn't have the opportunity. Okay, so now here's where we would ask some implication questions. What implication questions would you ask about this? No, those are factual questions. What are implication questions? Remember, implication questions are like, what does this imply about? It's not an answer. We're looking for questions. No, you're gonna make a statement with a question. Don't have an idea in your head of what the answer is. Just ask an implication question. Of? So here, this is the push through level in Bible study that most people never get to, is training your brain to think in terms of the right kind of questions. If you never get this, you'll never break through to the really impactful insights. And so this is going to hurt a little tonight. It's going to cause your brain to think in ways it doesn't normally, but I really want to push through this together and see if we can start thinking. Think about an implication question about flourishing, care flourishing, because it now has an opportunity. What would we ask? What does this imply about? Okay, we could ask that. What does this imply about opportunities? That'd be one way of coming about at it. What would be another way to come at it? That's not an implication question. That's a factual question that's not answered by the text. But we're getting back to factual. This is you guys have gotten good at asking factual. We want to press through to the implication. So just simple, you always start it with what is implied by. Just always start with that. Or what does X imply? Okay, close. It's a lot simpler than you think. I felt like, Charlotte, I felt like you had it. What's implied? Like, you could just ask, what's implied about flourishing? You could just ask that. And what does this imply about flourishing? That it needs opportunity, right? Now, what kind of flourishing is Paul talking about? We've taken a step back to factual. What's flourishing here? Their care. So then we would come back and ask what kind of implication question? What's a better implication question? What does this imply about what causes care to flourish? That's the better question. And what does it imply? What does care need in order to flourish? An opportunity. What does that imply if we don't have opportunity, or we don't see opportunity, or we don't look for opportunity? We won't flourish in our care for others. See how that works? All right. And now we could have some solid application. If you wanted to grow people in their care for others, what would you need to do? Provide an opportunity or awareness of opportunity. Right? Because there's probably a lot more opportunity than there is awareness. That's probably more what's lacking, is people's awareness of opportunity. That make sense? Okay, so now we missed a big thing here in this verse that we could ask some really good implication questions about. Let's go back to the rejoicing. What factual questions would you ask about this? About the context of rejoicing here. And I want to let you in on a secret. Not a secret, but this is like a pro tip. What do we know about the word rejoice in Philippians? Same as grace, but as a repetition, what do we know about it? It's one of our main repetitions. And so when I see a word that's a main repetition, I keep track of the different ways that it's used. And I want to understand, what is Paul telling me? What are all the things that Paul's telling me about rejoicing in this book? And so I actually have a separate page in my notes, actually about 2.5 pages, of just the word rejoice and the principles and the applications that Paul has used with this one word rejoice. I think there are 17 different facets of rejoicing that Paul has taught in this book. That makes sense? And if you were to keep track of all those, it starts to really round out your theology, at least from the book of Philippians, about the word rejoice. It would give you a much richer understanding of what it means to rejoice. So when I got here, what am I looking at? I see the word rejoice. What does that make me want to do? Yeah, what's he saying about rejoice? And I open up my rejoice page and I see, is this something new? And I found out, yes, this is a new thought about rejoicing that he hasn't talked about before. And so what is Paul? So I would ask the factual question, what is Paul saying about rejoicing? Okay, well, so have we had rejoicing in the Lord before? Yes, we have, lots of times. What's new? Is there anything new? He qualifies it with abundance. So what's that imply about what he's rejoicing in? Yeah, so he's saying, that this object of joy for me is something more significant than other things I'm rejoicing in. That makes sense? So this is a great source of joy. This should be a great source of joy. That makes sense? Now, what is it that he's finding an abundance of joy in? Take a look at that. Just stick in that. We're in that first sentence of verse 10. All right. What's he rejoicing greatly in the Lord about? That their care has flourished. Again, right? So their care has flourished. And then we want to ask an implication question. I got to discipline myself not just to ask it. What implication question would you ask about that? Remember, it's either what is implied or what's significant. How, what, where, those are all what kind of questions? Factual questions. So we want to discipline ourselves to start the question with, what does this imply about, or what's significant about? What's the question? What does what imply? Good. That's a good implication question. Everybody hear it? Say it really loud. Yeah, so that's a good implication question. What's significant about rejoicing in someone else's care flourishing? And what's the answer to that? What's significant about that? It's others focused. What is Paul saying he's rejoicing in? Other people's flourishing. And to what degree does he rejoice in other people flourishing? Greatly. This is one of the greatest sources of joy for Paul, is seeing other people flourish. Now, what's significant about that? Yeah, what does that imply about what should cause us the greatest joy? Others flourishing. What does that imply if we don't have great joy? Too self-focused. You can't rejoice, have great joy if you are self-focused. That makes sense? All right? Now, let's go down to, so much we can ask about this. So when I say, I literally ask and answer for each chapter probably 300 to 400 questions. For a Sunday sermon, it's probably 500 to 600 questions that I will ask and answer in the process of a week worth of studying. It's all in the asking and answering of the right questions. I am not smarter. I don't have better insight. I've just been taught to ask good questions. If you learn to ask good questions, you're going to be an incredible Bible scholar. You're going to have great insight. This is the bread and butter. This is like the backbone of Bible study, is asking and answering good questions. Okay, so let's ask another question about this sentence. There's probably another 10 or so good implication questions to ask about verse 10. But let's just ask a few because I want to keep going through it. What does this imply? Oh, no, I jumped there. I don't think I did the factual question first. Sure.
Okay, ask a question. Well, if I'm asking all these implication questions, how do I know that the answer is correct?
Because you started with what kind of questions? Factual questions. So you only ask implication questions about the factual questions you've been able to answer. You only ask implication questions about the factual questions you've been able to answer. That make sense? And that was the big challenge with the implication questions you guys have sent in the past 2 weeks. They haven't been tied to the text at all. It's just wonderings. It's musings. I wonder why Paul would have thought, I wonder if Paul did this, you know. It's not in the text anywhere. There's zero answers for that.
An implication question always has to be tied to the factual.
Yes. That's why we start with factual questions, and then it's like rung on a ladder. We can't climb to the next one until we've taken that one. Okay? And that's what keeps us grounded and not making up crazy stuff. Okay? And that's why I always say, what does the text say? Because if the text doesn't say it, you're making up crazy stuff. All right? So we've talked about what Paul's rejoicing in, and what is he rejoicing greatly in? That their care has flourished. What did we say caused care to flourish? Opportunity. So what opportunity did the Philippians have that caused their care to flourish? To Paul. So Paul had seems like some kind of physical, probably financial need, and they gave to meet that need. That makes sense? Everybody clear on that? All right, clearly in the text. So that's our factual answer that we're going to base our implication questions on. Now, we could ask the question as what's implied about the Philippians' focus that caused them to flourish? What did they have to see? They had to see the opportunity. They had to see the need. You see how we're still clearly in the guardrails of the text here with our implication questions? Okay. Now, what does that imply about what causes us to flourish? We have to look for opportunities of others, the needs of others. We have to be looking, seeing, responding to the needs of others. What does that imply about what would keep us from flourishing? So here's the application. We can't flourish when we're self-focused. You see how we got there? All right, started with our factual questions, then our implication questions, and then our application. And so you can solidly teach this principle that you can't flourish as a follower of Jesus if you're self-focused. That make sense? Okay. And that's kind of a cool insight. All right? Self-focus keeps you from flourishing in Christ. All right, let's move on. Verse 11. Let's go back to verse 11. What does Paul want to be clear about that he's not talking about? Okay, so he says, not that I speak in regard to need. What's significant about that? What is Paul wanting to clarify here? Make sure they don't misunderstand. Yes. Everybody catch that? Right? That's huge. Paul wants them to be really clear that his joy is not because his need got met. He says, I'm not talking about my needs here. What's he talking about? They're flourishing. And he wants them to be really sure that they're not misunderstanding him to thinking that his great joy is that his rent got paid. Right? And think about that. Now, how foreign is this to what most Christians find joy in? Yeah, hey, I had a need I prayed for. I can't tell you. I'm not. If you texted me one of these recently, don't think I'm coming down on you. I'm not thinking of any single person here right now. But I every week, and I rejoice with people. But I would say 100% of the rejoice with me text I get is because a personal prayer got answered. 100%. I can't remember any time someone has texted me. That's not true. Tim has done it on several occasions where he said, hey, we've been praying for this person. I wanted to give you an update. They're flourishing. But it's always the other. Hey, praise the Lord, Pastor. God answered my prayer. I got that raise, or I got that job opportunity, or I met my holy hottie. We're getting married. You know, it's always these kind of rejoice with me because my need, my desire got met. And while I'm happy to rejoice with them, what do I know from Philippians? That person isn't flourishing. Yes, absolutely. But it shouldn't be my greatest joy. It shouldn't be anywhere close. And Paul makes the point here that, hey, just so you understand, my great joy here isn't that my need got met, but that your care flourished. That's way better, much greater than my personal need or desire or prayer being met. Okay. So a super profound thought. Now, what would be the application we want to ask ourselves? Yeah. So one thing I love to do is to take the words of the text and work them into answers. So for this, let me show you how I would do that. I would ask the question, where's my greater joy? See, I'm using the text. All right. Is my greater joy, if I look back at the last week, month, year, where has my greatest joy been? And that's just a really good question to ask yourself. Because if we go back and look at all, and this helps understand the contrast a little bit. Now, take what the few implication questions we've been able to ask, and ask yourself, what does this imply about the contrast? Yeah, all of these things are about whom? Yeah, like Paul's been saying, hey, you need to be joyful. You need to be agreeable. You need to be gentle. All these things are more about whose experience? The Philippians' experience. What's the contrast? Paul's greatest joy is others. So he's actually setting himself in contrast to where he's hoping the Philippians will get to. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could definitely take each one of those imperatives, right? So take all 5 of those, and you can see how Paul shows himself not in contrast to, but kind of moving beyond it. All right, keep moving that needle towards maturity. Because remember what did he finish up chapter 3 with? I'm not there yet, but what is he doing? He's pressing. And so what's the idea here about Philippians? What's he trying to encourage them? To press. So Paul's pushing them a little bit in their thinking. Okay, so he said that he's not speaking in regards to need. And then we get an internal substantiation. What's the internal substantiation here? For I have learned what? So Paul says, I've learned to be content, right? In whatever state I am. What's significant about that? What is something you develop? Okay, so just using the words of the text, what does this imply? What is Paul implying about contentment? That contentment is something that has to be learned. Okay. So Paul says it's something that I had to learn. What's implied about contentment? Okay, so it doesn't come naturally. It's something that I like where Lisa was going with it. What was that? Yeah, it's not based on your state. Right? Because what has he learned? Whatever state. So contentment isn't based on your circumstances. And that's what he means by state, right? The condition of his circumstances that he's in. What's that? Again, what does that show us, or what does that imply about contentment? If it's not based on something exterior, it's something internal that I can learn, right? Contentment is something that I can learn in any state. So if I'm not content about something, what's my application? Yeah, I have to learn. So think about it. When we're discontented with something, what do we tend to focus on? What about ourselves? What we don't have, right? So discontentment is about something that I don't have. It's something I'm missing. It's something that's not, that I don't see as right in my life. And so what's my focus on? And how do we fix that? Focus on that circumstance and try to change what? The circumstances. What's Paul telling us needs to change? Myself. And so you see how why people live in a continual state of discontentment, because it doesn't matter how many circumstances you change, the discontentment was never linked to your circumstance. The problem is with yourself. And if there's no change in yourself, no matter of circumstantial change will resolve the discontentment. You'll always find something, because where's the discontentment according to Paul? It's internal within us. We haven't learned how to be content. There's something we're missing in our understanding that's causing us to feel discontentment. That make sense? Yeah? Yeah? Because if we can get this is one of those keys to rejoicing always. Because what keeps people from rejoicing? Discontentment's one of the big ones. Right? And if we don't know the solution to resolving discontentment, we will always be discontent, no matter what we change. Right? It doesn't matter what job you get, what relationship you start. It doesn't matter, it's that as you watch people progress through life, right? It's when you're in high school, going into college, what do you think is going to make you content? Well, so I'm watching my kids go into college, right? And it's mostly about friendships at this stage, right? Landing in a good community, doing well in classes, having good professors. And, I have these conversations with Ellie all the time. Well, she'll complain about a professor, and I hate that class. I'm like, what would it take for you to love that class regardless of the professor? What am I teaching her? How do I learn to be content with any professor, in any subject? Because this is really what's going to make it a great experience for her. If she thinks that she's a victim of her professors, college is a hit and miss experience, right? Because you have some great professors and you have some just horrible professors. Yeah, but sometimes you don't, unless you're on the 17-year plan, right? You can't get just great professors, right? And so learning to be content is one of the most powerful principles in having a joy-filled life. If you can learn to be content in any state, in any circumstance, right? Because then once you hit your junior year into your senior year, what are you looking at when you're in college? What's the next thing? Career, internships, right? You're thinking, I got to land a good job. What city am I going to live in? Once you get kind of landed in a good field, what do you start thinking about? What starts to feel missing in your life? When you're single and, now I need to get married, right? And if I can just get married, then I'll be content. Once you get married, then what comes in? Children, right? And then once you have children, we'll get to that, right? Then it's like, gosh, we can just sleep through the night. I'll be content. Remember that? Right? That didn't do it. And then it's like, well, once they're potty trained, once they go to school, once they graduate from school, then once they get out of the house, right? And it's this never-ending pursuit of a change that's exterior to yourself and not the real root of your discontentment. How many of you would want to go the rest of your entire life feeling discontent? Always needing that next purchase, right? How many people are like, gosh, if we could just buy a house, How many of you own homes? How many of you is that a source of contentment? It's like once you get the house, it's like this is a money pit. Right? This is constant. We were living when Nan and I were living in Bay Park. We had just a postage. I mean, you could barely. We had to if we were going to have a personal conversation, we had to go to the center of the house because our neighbors were so close. Right? Close all the windows and we're like, gosh, we just get a piece of property with some place for the kids to run and stuff like that, and we got that. Now what do I have to deal with? Weeds. Weeds for days. Right? It's literally 3 days of 8 hours of weed whacking to get all the weeds on my property. And, as soon as it looks great when they're all done. How long do you think that lasts? 2 weeks. 2 weeks till it gets rain, which has been a lot recently. No, for some reason, weeds don't need rain. It's like the only thing in my yard that grows without water. And so what would your life be like if you had learned to be content in every situation? How many of you would like to be content? To learn how to be content in every situation. Well, what does Paul tell us? He knows how to do what? No, take a look at that. Look at verse 12. What does it say? I know how. I love that word in the English because it really carries the connotation of the Greek. Know how. Right? When you take that verb and you turn it into a noun, it's a different kind of knowledge, isn't it? Paul doesn't say I know about being content. What does he say? I know how. And the Greek word here implies a full understanding, not just a theoretical understanding, but a full, practical, complete understanding. He's got know-how. Awareness of how to do something. Now, let's ask a factual question. What does Paul know how to do? Okay, what does the word abased mean? Degraded, humiliated. At its root, it's just lower, right? And in the context, what's the connotation? Abased in what way? Lacking what? Friends? Lacking sunshine? Lacking what? In this context. In this context, it seems to be financial. So what does it mean to be abased materially? Poor. So let me ask you this. Do you know how to be content being poor? If you're a college student, you're like, yeah. Right? Well, probably not even then. I don't know many content poor people. I don't know many content people, so I don't know a lot of content rich people, right? But what would it take for you? Think about your life right now. What would you have to lose in order to become poor? Your job? What else? Your house? We're just talking financially poor. Your insurance, your car, your home, your phone, your bank accounts, your retirement, your savings. Do you have the know-how to be content with that? Or would you panic?
Do you have the ability to utilize resources?
What's Paul saying here in the text? I know. Paul says, I know how to. What does Paul say? I know how to game the system. I know how to apply for this benefit. He doesn't say that. What does he say? I know how to be poor. Do you have that kind of know-how? Most Americans don't. What else does Paul know how to do? He knows how to have a lot. Well, no, he actually doesn't say that. What does he say? But what's the context? What's he telling us? It's not just I know how to be poor, and it's not just I know how to be rich. What does he know? He knows how to be content with being poor or being rich. I don't know if you guys know a guy named Rick Warren. He wrote a book, The Purpose-Driven Life, made tens of millions of dollars off that book. And I got to be a part of a Q&A with him, not with him, but in an audience with a Q&A about his life. And the moderator asked him, isn't it true that you've made tens of millions of dollars off your book sales? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And he said, how did that change you? And he said, I can honestly say it hasn't. When the book started to do well, my wife and I sat down and we decided that we were content. And so we chose not to buy a new home, not to buy new vehicles. In fact, he still buys used trucks. He likes trucks. I think Ford is his truck choice. But he always buys it used, doesn't buy a new truck. He says, I still buy my clothes at Walmart. And what does he have? He has contentment that there was nothing lacking that the money added to his life. Here's a man who knows how to abound with contentment. So here's the question. Would you, if we were to give you $10 million today, would that radically change your lifestyle? Would you buy a house? Would you buy brand new vehicles? Would you start throwing cash around? Or would you come at it from a perspective of contentment? Where you're like, I don't need it. I think it's almost easier to know how to be poor, how to be content being poor, because there's little temptation except resentment and envy with poverty. But with wealth comes the temptation to buy all those things that you've thought might enhance the quality of your life. Potentially a lot more idols. And so here's Paul saying, I had to learn this. I actually had to develop a way of thinking that enables contentment at any state. All right, so that Paul now approaches every state with the same mindset. And what's implied from the text? And, he goes through, actually, let's get down to verse 13, because this is important. What does Paul say here about the state? What's the second? So he knows how to abase, he knows how to abound everywhere in all things. What's significant about that? No exceptions. There's no place that will make him more content. And there's no thing that will make him more content. I feel like this is a good word for people living in Southern California, because what's the big temptation in Southern California? With high taxes, high traffic, liberal policies, what's the big temptation for Christians in particular? There's somewhere else where I'll be more content. There's somewhere else that I'll be happier. And what happens when you get there? you're still there, right? It's still you. And if you're not taking contentment with you, you're not going to find it there. And so here's this really powerful principle for Paul. There's no where that makes him more content, and there's no thing that will make him more content. What's the implication for us?
Nothing can make us more, nothing can make us more. No circumstance.
No exception. We can be content.
You're right there, Lisa. Yeah, there is no greater opportunity to be content than right here, right now. Right? There's no greater opportunity to be content than right here, right now. How powerful is that? That this is your greatest opportunity right here, right now to be content. I believe with all my heart you could walk out of here tonight the most content you have ever been in your entire life. There is nothing in your circumstances that is hindering your contentment. You just got to learn how to do it. How far does Paul take poverty here at the end of verse 12? Yeah, not just, hey, I'm broke. What's he saying? I'm hungry. I actually don't have food. Paul's learned to be content without even basic necessities. Now, verse 14. Oh, actually, verse 13, the most misapplied verse in the entire Bible. So let's talk about this. Now, what's our context been? Contentment everywhere, in all things, right? Learning that kind of contentment. In that context, what does he say in verse 13? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What is the implication in the context? What are the all things in this context? What? What about those things? What can he do in all things? So the all things refers to poverty, abundance, hunger, fullness, need, right? What can he do in all those things? Be content through Christ who strengthens him. Okay, so you see how the verse is very limited in its application. What are the all things that Paul's talking about? And what's the can do that he's talking about? Being content. It's a very limited, I can do all things. If we're sticking with the context, it would be better. I wish he had said, I can be content in all things through Christ who strengthens me, because that's the meaning. That's what it's limited to. It's not, I can overcome any obstacle. I can do my heart's desire. Whatever I set my heart on, I can do through Christ who strengthens me. Right? I can misquote verses through Christ who strengthens me. No, this is one thing that Paul's talking about in the context. Being content. Now, what does this imply about being content? That it's not something we can do in our own strength. that this kind of contentment only comes through Christ's strength. So what does that imply about what you have to learn? To be in Christ, because that's the only way you're going to have his strength to be content, is to be in Christ. What's he been talking about in this chapter? Stand firm in the Lord, in Christ. This makes sense? Yes? See how he's tying it all beautifully together with a nice bow on it for us? Okay. All right. Now, in the context, remember, this is a implied contrast, so it ties to verses 1 through 9. What if we were to look at verses 1 through 9 as ways to learn contentment? Is there any application in verses 1 through 9 about learning how to be content?
I don't know if we covered 8 and 9 last week.
We just
Yeah, but that to meditate on all these things, when we're looking it up, it's meant to kind of take stock
Mm-hmm.
that we have these things. And so all of these things in verse 8, the things that are true, noble, just, right, pure, these are all the things that we have in Christ. And I think that can help us to achieve contentment because we have all these things.
Yeah, so excellent. So you made some like big leaps there. So let's bring everybody along with you because you're pretty far ahead. But those excellent, awesome insights, right? Remember what is discontentment? What's the focus on in discontentment? What about ourselves? What about our circumstances? Remember, lack, right? So discontentment is always this feeling that something's missing. It's a focus on what we don't have, right? I don't have the job I want. I don't have the boss I want. I don't have the house I want. I don't have the spouse I want. I don't have the kids I want. I don't have the health I want. I don't have the finances I want. That's where all the discontentment is, right? It's focus. It's a focus. It's a self-focus on what we don't have. If we just go back to verses 8 and 9, what's the first clue that Paul's giving us about how to learn how to be content? Meditate. All right? This mindfulness, this taking stock of, right? And what does he tell us to focus on in order to learn to be content? Yeah, let me go back to that. I have a slide there. This is half of it. Let me take rid of this really quick.
So why are you looking at the word whatever thing? He constantly says that. So to me, he's stressing that.
Yes. Well, actually doesn't. So the word whatever is only there once. It's literally what is. It can have this whatever, but it's a little stronger in the English than it actually is in the Greek. But what he's hitting on is what David was saying, right? This idea of what's true. And remember what, and here's the definition for true. What does true mean? Yeah, I love this definition. Consistent with fact or reality. When you're discontented or fearful or, typically your thinking isn't consistent with reality. All right? Like, how many of you think you're poor? All right. Well, what do we know the facts are? Yeah, if you make over $4,000 a year, you're in the top 25% of income earners on the planet. All right, your typical high school kid is in Southern California is in that category if they have a part-time job. If you make more than $25,000 a year, in the top 10%. If you make more than $60,000 a year, you're in the top 5% of income earners. If you make over $100,000 a year, you're in the top, I think, 0.5% of income earners on the planet. It's crazy, isn't it? Mind-blowing. All right, so when we think, oh, I don't have anything, what's not lining up with reality? Our thoughts. Yeah, we're not thinking about things that are lining up with reality. What would it look like to meditate on things that are true? Yeah, what do we all get to walk out of here and get into? Our car. I forgot what percent. It's like 3% of the planet owns a vehicle. Isn't that crazy? You ever think about that? What about going home tonight? What do you get to sleep in? How many square feet are in your home? Divide that by the number of people living in your home. You know what the average square foot of a home in Haiti is? Per person? 4. 4 square feet per person is the average home size in Haiti. You can't even lay down in that. All right? What else would it look like to meditate on what's true, what's conforming to reality? Think about truth we need to think about. Yeah, what's our weather like? Even when it's not, it's still better than everywhere else. Right? What about our relationships? Right? The friendships that you have. What about the conveniences, the daily conveniences? Amazon, right? Yeah, I was complaining that I ordered something and I couldn't get it next day. And Nan's like, are you really complaining about that? Right? But I need it for tomorrow. Right? This is a ministry thing. Why can't Amazon get on the ball? Right? And instead of realizing, wow, my life is so good. Right? How grateful should we be? Just think about it. In terms of how good your life is by comparison to the rest of the planet, is your gratitude exceeding that percentage of people on the planet? Because we technically should be, we're just looking at our circumstances, we should be in the top 1% of most grateful people on the planet. If we're conforming to reality. That make sense? So how would you practice that? So what would that look like? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's take a minute, and I want you to think of all the things that God's blessed you with that you haven't said thank you to Him today for yet. Okay? Take a minute. Okay, that was a minute. Was that easy or hard? You think you could have done 5 minutes? So these are the things that we have to learn. When I do these exercises, most people aren't practiced enough at thinking about the good things in their life, they actually find it difficult. And their blinds go blank. Most people's minds go blank after about 20 seconds, and then they got to start working at it. What's the next thing that Paul tells us to meditate on? Things that are noble, right? And noble means worthy of respect and honor. I want you to think about someone that you struggle with. Somebody you're at odds with, somebody that makes your life difficult, someone that's a pain in the neck, a thorn in your side, a general annoyance in your life. Everybody got somebody? Okay, I want you to take a minute, and I want you to think of things that are worthy of respect and honor about that person. Okay, was that one easier or harder? All right, what does that show that we haven't learned? We haven't learned to think about people in terms of what is worthy of honor and respect. In fact, most people, I would say our culture has learned the opposite. How to be critical and resentful of others. Those are easy for us. What's the next thing he tells us to be mindful of? What is just? And that means conforming to the law, equitable. What does it mean to think about things that are conforming to the law and equitable? Yeah, exactly, right? There's this idea about being someone who tries to be just and fair with everyone. That makes sense? Take a minute, and I want you to think about in what ways are you being, I'm going to take off of what Ray said. Think about your neighbors, the people that live next to you, around you. How are they benefiting from your life? I'll give you a quick example. My neighbors, Tahara and Steve Tweed, this week, brought my trash cans up my driveway. Anybody who's been in my house knows that's a feat. All right? They brought my trash cans up, and they mowed about an acre of my weeds. Just because they wanted to. We didn't ask them. They just decided, hey, we should bless George and Nat. They've both been pretty busy. All right? How are your neighbor? Well, let's not do how are. Let's think about how could you be a blessing to your neighbors? How could you be a good neighbor to those in your immediate surrounding? Okay, take a minute and think about your neighbors and think about what you could do to be a blessing to them. All right, what's the next one? What is pure? And what does pure mean here? Yeah, it talks about moral purity. What did you say, Lisa? Prepared for worship? I like that concept. I'd have to dig into the word before I taught it, but we'll just say you're right on that. So think about who's coming tomorrow night to the Last Supper celebration. Okay, so a good chunk of you are. But we got Easter coming up. So either in terms of tomorrow night for our Last Supper celebration, or think in terms of the Easter service you're going to go to. What would you think about in order to prepare your heart to be pure for worship. Okay, so in terms of Easter or the Last Supper, I want you to think Jesus' thoughts. So try to picture Jesus in the last week of his life. Just think about the qualities and characteristics of Jesus that we would worship at Easter. Okay, so his love, his sacrifice, his willingness, whatever those, his grace, whatever things you want to think about, try to picture Jesus at the different aspects of Easter week. Okay? Take a minute. Go ahead. All right, I'm actually going to speed this up a little bit because we're almost out of time. But think about how would your worship experiences be different if you just took a minute to sit in your car and meditate on Jesus for a minute before you came into service, and just prepared your heart through meditation. All right? And just I want to clarify, when we talk about meditation, it's the meditation Paul's talking about here is radically different than the world's version of meditation. Eastern meditation is about emptying your mind. For Paul, what is Christian meditation, biblical meditation about? Filling it. It's the exact opposite. In fact, I forgot I was going to do this illustration. I do this for Impact, where I have a glass half full of dirty water, clear glass, and I bring in a pitcher of clean water, and I start pouring it, and what eventually happens? Yeah, the clean water displaces the dirty water. And that's what Christian meditation's about. It's about filling yourself with all these good things until it displaces all the negative stuff in your heart and mind. All right, the next one is lovely, and I love this word. It's made up of two words, pros, phileos, from the word phileo, and it means whatever is love-inspiring. That which inspires love. So I want you to pick one person in your life. Everybody got one person? And I want you to, 30 seconds, think about things that inspire your love for them. Okay? Things that inspire your love for them. Okay, next one. That which is of good report. I love this word in the Greek, euphemos. It literally means good rumor. Good rumor. I was talking with Ellie about this week because I don't know what it is about college freshmen, but a lot of her social group, it seems like there's just like, do you guys go back to junior high? It seems like there's just all that kind of drama as people are, who's dating who and who's cute and all this stuff. And I was encouraging her, like, as you talk about these interactions, they seem like they're starting to get a negative tint to them. All right, you're saying things about people that while, yes, they may be true, they're unnecessarily negative. Make sense? I'm like, I don't need to know that. I mean, I'm glad she's talking with me. But I'm like, I don't need to, all those things she's sharing aren't adding anything to my impression of those people. In fact, it's only taking away from my impression of those people. Now, when I see certain people, when I go visit her on her campus, I'm going to meet this kid and I'm going to go, oh, you. We should talk, right? And so I want you to think about it. So it's so typical for us when we talk about people and when we think about people to gravitate towards the negative. Any gossipers in the room? I want to encourage you to be a good gossip. I want to hear me out here. Gossip is a bad thing. I want to flip it. I want to encourage you because the word here is literally good gossip. where you spread good reports about people. It's not where you spread bad thoughts about people, but you actually spread good things about people. So I want you to pick one person that you're going to be a good gossip about for a week. Someone that you can, and someone that's going to be, that needs to be in your secondary circle. And what I mean by that is someone that you talk to other people about. So like bosses are great people to be good gossips about. So think of, teachers, your pastor. I don't know. Hopefully you guys aren't talking about me all week. The kids, right? Your spouse. Be surprised how many spouses love to talk poorly about their spouse. How often I hear spouses downgrade their spouse in public to other people. So pick one person and take 30 seconds and think about what are the good rumors you're going to spread about them this week. All right, and then the last two, we're not going to go through them, but I want you to see them. What is a virtue? That's what gives someone their moral worth. And then what's praiseworthy? The objects of praise. So 8 things, 1 minute each, takes you 8 minutes. I want to challenge you to build this into your daily routine. If you ever struggle with discontentment, this is one of the things you need to learn how to do, is reset your focus for the day. Right? And how do you feel right now? Feel content? Right? Isn't it amazing? Just taking a minute and focusing on 8 different things can change your entire state of being. If you were to do this every day for just 8 minutes, it will radically change your life. And if we had time, we would go back to verses 6 and 7, and what would be the next thing, the next tool to learn? To not be anxious. All right? And then if we were to take some time and go to verse 5, what would be the next thing that we need to learn? Gentleness. Remember, what is gentle? What does it mean to be gentle? Yeah, so gentleness is all about power under control. Right? It's why kids need dads to wrestle with, especially boys. Because where does a boy learn how to control his strength? From dad, right? Because what can dad do to a little kid? Throw him sky high, right? It's just terrifying to moms, right? But why do kids love it? Because it's power that's safe. It teaches that power is not a bad thing. It's a glorious thing if it's used appropriately. And I remember, when Jackson started working out, we were, still wrestling, 12, 13. It was kind of like, okay, buddy, one of us is going to get hurt if you don't back off, right? You're now at that age where if I escalate, I'm going to hurt you. If I don't, you're going to hurt me, right? So something needs to change. Right? It's time to start moderating, learning to control that. That's gentleness. And so how are we not gentle? Yeah, when we use power to benefit ourselves at someone else's expense. That's when we stop being gentle. That makes sense? And then if we were to go up to verses 3 and 4, what would we learn? What would be another thing we'd have to learn? Yeah, verse 4 would be to choose joy always and everywhere. And then the verse 2 and 3 to be agreeable. If you learned all these things, what would you be? content. If you learned how to, and I wish we had time, wish we had another week just to spend on this. But if we could spend a week on how to come into agreement with one another. This is the number one thing I teach in premarital. The very first week we go over Amos 3:3. Anybody know Amos 3:3? Can two walk together unless they're agreed? Why is that a key foundational verse for marriage? Because marriage is a companionship. The Bible actually calls it a companionship. If you're not, and most couples, if they don't know how to agree, they walk very separate paths. Not necessarily. I mean, you can take your shoe off, you can spit in each other's, there's all kinds of different ways to do a covenant. Take an oath. Oath is typically the way you do a covenant. But this idea of learning how to be agreeable and how much discontentment relationally that solves. Just to learn to be agreeable is one of the most powerful tools you can learn for a joy-filled life. I would, purely anecdotal, I would say 70 to 80% of all the marriage conflict that I counsel is disagreement. It's just not being on the same page about stuff. And if you could just solve that, we're wasting so much time and energy on disagreeing needlessly about stuff. When in reality, if you agree, in fact, it was one thing that Nan and I learned, first with her dad and then with her mom. Both her parents ended up getting dementia. Her dad lived with us and had it. We didn't realize it. It's kind of like the slow decline that you don't catch. But once we figured out that he was suffering from dementia, it solved all of my conflict with him. Because he and I were just at odds about everything. He wanted everything, because I'm like, this is my house, buddy. Right? We do this my way. I pay the mortgage here, not you. But once I learned he has dementia, what the thing that the doctor said was, just say yes. I don't care how absurd it seems. They're going to forget. Just say yes. Just agree. You don't have to win every fight with someone who has Alzheimer's. There's no real point to it. There's no victory. And so I would say the same thing is true in life. There are very few things worth wading through disagreement in. Very few things. If it's unbiblical, yeah, we can dig into that. But most of it's just preference. And there's really no loss in your life. The real loss that you're experiencing is relationally. Anyway, winning group to claim your concordance in Greek and Hebrew dictionary is Mark's group. You guys won it. So congratulations. Peter's group, you guys were a close second, so well done. Yeah, come up and claim it. Come up and claim it. And there you go. And be sure to give Mark his. He was. All right, let me pray for you. Hopefully this has been helpful. We'll probably do another book in 3 months or so. So be on the watch for that. We'll announce it. I know it's been a lot. I know your brains are probably tired, but I appreciate you coming out. And just with feedback that we've gotten, we'll probably bump it earlier. We'll probably start at 6, and a lot of people said for them it's a little late. So we'll probably do it a little earlier. But let me pray for you. Father, thank you for this group that's just come faithfully for the last 12 weeks. I pray that everything they've learned would start to work in their life, help them see what's really in the text and learn to ask great questions about it so that they could have rich application as they dig into your word on their own. So bless them, God. Thank you for this time in this book. We trust you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. God bless you guys.